Здравствуйте, дорогие участники нашего симпозиума по новым концепциям технологий исследований в междисциплинарных областях истории и культуры. И Пермский государственный национально-исследовательский университет вас рад приветствовать. Скажите, пожалуйста, хорошо ли слышно, видно? И мы будем начинать наше мероприятие.
Да, все хорошо.
Спасибо. Я начну с приветствия и скажу пару слов о том мероприятии, которое проходит сегодня. Наш симпозиум является частью большого крупного форума «Наука и глобальные вызовы 21 века». И это мероприятие, оно отражает как раз-таки междисциплинарную сущность самого форума, когда могут на одних площадках встретиться и гуманитарии, и, естественно, научные дисциплины и их представители, и обсудить волнующие нас вопросы. В этом году у нас формат гибридный, поэтому я еще рада приветствовать участников, которые есть у нас в зале, и кто к нам еще присоединится в офлайне или в онлайне. Всех рада видеть и приветствовать. Я рада отметить, что это мероприятие, оно стало таким в определенной мере знаковым, потому что, несмотря на все трудности и сложности современности, мы можем продолжать настраивать и отлаживать нашу профессиональную научную коммуникацию, потому что это бывает так непросто, бывает непросто. И для того, чтобы подчеркнуть новые стандарты открытости, у нас сегодня будет совершенно замечательный спикер, профессор Пол Артур, и буквально он выступит через пару минут после приветственного слова. Чтобы обеспечить хотя бы частично эти стандарты открытости, мы к данному мероприятию подготовили два сборника, то есть они должны уже выйти в ближайшее время. Один из них, который покрывает международную часть, будет издан в издательстве «Шпрингер» и проиндексирован, конечно же, в международных базах данных, чтобы результаты наших исследований стали так доступны и открыты в глобальном плане. Также будет издан сборник статей в русскоязычной части, и мы уже заканчиваем, собственно, верстку, и в ближайшее время будет регистрация этого сборника. Итак, рады всех приветствовать, и мы незамедлительно начинаем. И здесь я должна переключиться на английский язык через минутку. Я вам представляю нашего первого докладчика. Пленарная сессия открывается с докладом профессора Пола Артура, председателя направления по цифровым, гуманитарным и социальным наукам университета Edith Cowan, Perth, Австралия. Paul, we are so happy to have you here at this conference, and we are ready to launch the first keynote presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful to be welcomed to speak at this important event. Can I share my screen? Because I'll show some PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, for sure. И я еще скажу, что после доклада Пола Артура я сделаю небольшой summary для тех, для русскоговорящей аудитории.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really honoured to be able to speak to you today at the opening of this important event, and I'd like to thank Perm State University, the organisers of this event, and all of the presenters and the audience. Thank you for attending today. In my talk, I'll give an overview of key issues, directions, and priorities for open research in the humanities. And the talk draws from research I've been undertaking over the last couple of years, especially with my colleague in Australia, Dr. Lydia Hearn. In fact, the subject of open access and open research is especially significant right now, and that's because this week around the world is International Open Access Week, which is marked each year in different ways in different countries. And this is it has a different theme each year, and this year the theme is on climate justice. The theme is an invitation to share knowledge and data to help protect the environment, but each year there's a different theme. But it's really all about how can we share our research findings in the international community so that we can best benefit from all of our collective insights. And I think in the world that we've lived through in the last few years, the COVID pandemic has showed just how effectively all sorts of research can be shared, including from Russia, from other parts of the world, to develop vaccines. And this is a very scientific focus in terms of the hard sciences, but in the humanities, we also have the opportunity to also share our data and to allow others to utilize it. In today's rapidly changing world of information and communications technology, openness as a concept is transforming how knowledge is created and shared. The potential for unrestricted global circulation of groundbreaking new ideas and discoveries represents one of the most valuable opportunities for our digital future. Billions of people have internet-connected devices and the capability to instantly retrieve a vast wealth of information online, offering practically limitless possibilities for access to information and data, but only provided that it's readily findable and freely available. Open research can also be referred to as open scholarship or open knowledge. And so I've shown a slide here. What is open research? It encompasses open access, open data, open science, open educational resources, and all other forms of openness in the scholarly and research environment, and using digital formats, tools, standards, and infrastructures. To step back for a moment, the open research movement began over 2 decades ago internationally, and it seeks to reshape long-standing traditions of scholarly communication by encouraging more accessible, participatory, interactive, ethical, and transparent approaches, and to involve far wider and more diverse publics. And I'm very conscious of this in the systems that I work in, where the demonstration of the value of research for the public and for the community is especially important. It's aligned with broader open society initiatives in government, education, health, justice, and many others. So open research has a call for more equitable and inclusive societies. And I know that's something we all want, for different reasons. But it's a fundamental principle to include all of the people, and allow the results of research to benefit those that they're directed at. So by enhancing public engagement with academic research, open research aims to foster a culture of greater scientific education and literacy, strengthen national and international collaboration, and enrich the lives and livelihoods of people. The conventional model of scholarly communication that I think we're all very familiar with has reinforced the authority of printed documents with a well-established publishing paradigm that validated new knowledge, also controlling and managing its flow, but in the process limiting its readership. And by that I mean the cost of purchasing academic articles from publishers by universities or by individuals is extremely high and out of the reach of most people in any part of the world, quite honestly, but certainly in certain parts of the world that makes it even more difficult. Open research challenged this model about 20 years ago to transform from a closed and print-based model of sharing of research outputs to a more open system where information could be freely available for public benefit. Open research has gained significant momentum, accelerating dramatically in recent years around the world with the support of universities, governments, funders, publishers, libraries, the information and communications technology sector, and the public. Now, there are many drivers for this and motivations for openness, including improving academic publishing arrangements for more responsive and cost-effective circulation of research, pooling of expertise to find solutions to global problems and for sustainable development, ensuring better accountability and equity in research, and transitioning to fully digital publication and data sharing platforms. So all of these are motivations. But the initial focus of the open scholarship and open research movement in the early years of the 21st century was on unrestricted open access to published resources. In what was a radical departure at the time, its proponents championed principles of free and unimpeded public utilisation of the results of academic inquiry to remove barriers to all legitimate scholarly uses for scholarly literature. Research findings and data now can be published or made available online through a very wide array of open access journals, institutional repositories that are increasingly common in most universities in the world, rather than being hidden behind restrictive publication paywalls, which we all know the problems when research is hidden and can't be accessed, then that is a big challenge, and we have to find other ways of accessing it. But I'll mention briefly some of the initial motivations behind this. The Budapest Open Access Initiative, the Bethesda Statement on Open Access Publishing, and the Berlin Declaration on Access to Knowledge in the Sciences and Humanities. These all date back to early 2000s, but they're often recognised today together as the BBB declarations, and they're considered as the foundational international statements promoting openness in scholarly communication. And there's a very well-documented body of work over 20 years looking at those statements and their effect on national policies around the world. And this is particularly relevant to our collective interest in digital innovation and how we can, no matter what discipline we're situated in, advance work in our field and make that research available to a broader public. And I'll just put here on the next slide how the Budapest Open Access Initiative in 2002 defined this idea of open access. So it's 20 years ago, but it defined it as research being freely available on the public internet, permitting any users to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to the full text of these articles, crawl them for indexing, pass them as data to software, or use them for any other lawful purpose, without financial, legal, or technical barriers other than those inseparable from gaining access to the internet itself. It's quite an important statement and still stands now. And this includes making research data and metadata more visible and openly obtainable for use and importantly, reuse. In addition to storing and archiving of data by a researcher by their or an organisation's primary use, Open data allows free access for secondary analysis, verification, authentication, and as a basis for further research and development. But over this 20-year period, the whole idea of open research and open access and open scholarship has widened even further. And so in my next slide, I want to summarize that. The emerging vision for open research foresees a fully interconnected global scholarly ecosystem with a wide variety of open publishing models underpinned by linked, well-curated, interoperable software, data, and research articles comprising the entire process of scholarship, including grant proposals, data, software, educational materials and methods, and research evaluation. And the scope of this is really important because what it really means is that international groups and leaders in this field are calling for all of the aspects of our research to be made more openly available so that those processes can be, and those people and those articles and those methods can be cited and be then built upon by others to fast track research, to really make a difference in the world, rather than us sort of hiding our research and waiting until it's published. This calls for us to circulate it much more broadly. But making research as open and available as possible will demand further major scale coordinated change across every part of the system, and there are currently many barriers. Globally, the persistent lack of equitable access to academic research is a widening socioeconomic divide. Open practices are being adopted unevenly across countries and regions, within in particular, even within institutions and disciplines. So progressive open access and data policies are not straightforward to apply in a way that meets the needs of all users. And importantly, and I think this is something that we're all aware of in the world when we see the rankings of universities through these major national or global ranking systems, university evaluation continues to be determined largely by traditional bibliometrics. That's through publication and citation analysis, rather than in terms of public engagement or benefit, or the openness and availability of research. So there's a clear gap between some of these statements and what's really happening in our institutions. There are many different understandings of openness, and I thought it would be helpful here just to go through a number of them. So openness can be understood as free, unrestricted access to research, which is mainly what I've been talking about. Immediate online access to information by anyone with an internet connection, regardless of location. So it's a huge challenge in the world. And these policies are supported by large organisations like UNESCO and others in the world that are promoting an equitable and fair society. But there are many other interpretations of openness. So another one is here, openness as freedom of inquiry. And this relates to the ability of any individual user to access government or publicly funded research organisation data and to scrutinise that. The next one here is openness for governance and transparency. So in an ideal world, we would know exactly what is going on in terms of our governments, our research agencies, the way that our research councils are being administered, and we'd know exactly why decisions had been made to fund certain research. This is really important, and not. And in Australia, just to give a couple of examples, controversially, we've had a number of cases where a senior minister has vetoed certain grant applications and decided that they won't be funded. And so this is a problem in our country, and I think it is in a number of others. but we could continue openness as user rights. So this is the right to use the material that you find openly online. And that could mean you've accessed it through an open repository, or you've found a work that is Creative Commons licensed. And another issue here is openness as authorship rights. Often as academics, we give away our rights to our authorship in the process of publishing. But there are a lot of headings here, but they're all important, and they're part of this question about how do we make our research open, and also as academics and as universities sort of gain the right to claim that research and really own it. Further issues here are openness through a digital networked environment. So how can we reach outwards to other communities through, for example, collaborative projects that reach broader publics, or maybe engage with collecting institutions or museums or galleries and the like. And I know that Perm has done very important work in this area, as have other institutions. So openness can take other forms, and it can involve access to preprint and post-print versions of publications. Openness can also relate to sharing of educational resources. Openness can be considered in terms of preservation and sustainability of digitized material, and more generally for an open society. How can we share all of this material so that the work that's done in universities can have a major benefit in society? Over the past couple of decades, there have been many more statements following those earlier declarations that I mentioned, proposing how we can create this more open environment. Many of elements of these have been brought together in the set of 12 Vienna principles in 2016, and I'm showing you them here in the summarized form, but this remains very current, I think, even now, a few years later, because it's a fast-changing field. So I don't think anyone would disagree with these principles, that we should be able to access our research, make it discoverable by others, that it should be reusable. In other words, people should find it and be able to also reproduce it, that it should be clear how the research was gone about, so it's transparent, and also that it should be communicated in a very understandable way. That doesn't mean simplistic way, but it has to be communicated to wide audiences and stakeholders. And these principles also emphasize collaboration, which is something particularly important in the digital humanities field. Many of the large and successful digital humanities projects bring to bear lots of different skill sets. And other points here relate to quality, evaluation, progress, test of innovation, and ultimately, again, the public good. Why are we conducting research? These are all very, in a way, high-level questions to be looking at, but if you apply them to any particular research project, they become much more understandable and concrete. And many national research councils around the world are now asking for the results of research to be immediately published in open access journals or in repositories that universities may organise. And so one of the comments that the Coalition of Open Access Repositories has made is this one, which I think is quite powerful, and that is that there is also a future vision to connect up all this data. It's one thing to make it available within one's institutional repository, but even more important is to try to connect it. And I know we have a lot of challenges in terms of standards, languages, and the whole international picture in terms of connecting up our data. But this is a vision that each individual repository is of limited value for research. The real power of open access lies in the possibility of connecting and tying together repositories, which is why we need interoperability. So people working in the digital humanities in particular will be used to thinking about these questions. Just for my last slide, I wanted to say that in view of Open Access Week, which we're in at the moment, and thinking about international connections, the fact that I'm in Australia, I'm speaking to you in Russia, I'm very pleased to do so and want to build a larger academic community around this research and this interoperability question. The future success of the international open research movement will really be dependent on participants working together to increase the uptake, effectiveness and sustainability of open practices, to ensure they're inclusive, equitable and serve the needs of a diverse global community. And there are many questions that sit under how that might be achieved, but especially given that we're in Open Access Week internationally today, or this week, I'm very happy to be able to speak to you today about this and to alert you to some of the new directions in open access and open research, especially for the humanities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and the best of luck with your new book. It's definitely fundamental research. I know it will be published soon, so just can't wait to read it fully. And thank you very much for sharing your insights on the open scholarship. Just before the questions, I will give a short summary on this talk in Russian. Краткое summary по-русски, основные идеи. Сегодня открытая наука еще связана с Международной неделей открытого доступа, которая как раз проходит в данное время. И развитие открытой науки связано непосредственно с идеями развития нашего общества и формирования такого цифрового будущего. Открытые исследования также могут называться открытыми или открытыми знаниями. Что такое открытое исследование? Да? Это доступ, открытые данные, открытая наука, открытые образовательные ресурсы и другие формы открытости в научной и исследовательской среде, когда используются разные цифровые форматы, инструменты, стандарты и инфраструктуры. Будапештская инициатива открытого доступа в 2002 году определила открытый доступ как свободный доступ в общедоступном интернете, что позволяет любым пользователям читать, загружать, копировать, распространять, распечатывать, искать и ссылаться на полные тексты статей, сканировать их для индексации, чтобы они потом были... Их можно было найти в поисковых системах, передавать их в качестве данных в программное обеспечение или использовать их для любой другой законной цели без финансовых, юридических или технических барьеров, кроме тех, которые неотделимы от получения доступа к самому интернету, то есть кроме закрытых неких ресурсов. Тем не менее, фокус открытых исследований, он постепенно расширяет и сегодня охватывает гораздо больше, чем просто открытый доступ к публикациям и конечным результатам исследований, и включает в себя повышение наглядности, доступности данных исследований, а также их метаданных для их использования и повторного использования. В дополнение к хранению или архивированию данных, для их основного использования, для организации открытые данные обеспечить свободный доступ для их повторного анализа, проверки, верификации и также как в качестве основы для дальнейших исследований и разработок. Современное видение открытой науки еще шире, и она предваряет взаимосвязанную глобальную научную экосистему с широким разнообразием моделей открытых публикаций, подкрепленных связанным, тщательно отобранным, совместимым программным обеспечением, данными и исследовательскими статьями, которые включают полностью весь процесс проведения исследований, включая предложения о грантах, полученные данные, программное обеспечение, учебные материалы и методы, а также оценку результатов исследований. Для этого требуется инфраструктура для связи открытых коллекций, архивов, библиотек, хранилищ данных и образовательных ресурсов, а также для реализации открытых лицензий, политик доступа и открытого рецензирования научных статей. Ввиду акцента на открытую науку в естественных науках сегодня предпринимаются шаги и направлены на поощрение открытости в гуманитарных науках, и их чаще стали называть открытыми гуманитарными науками. Они непосредственно стали ключевой областью исследований и в области цифровых гуманитарных наук, поскольку внедрение открытых практик происходит медленнее у гуманитарных исследований, но вместе с тем есть большой потенциал для охвата широкой аудитории, большего воздействия исследований на общество и культуру. Были перечислены 12 основных принципов открытости. Я их не буду перечислять, их можно будет посмотреть в записи. Мы записи выложим на наших каналах. И в заключение есть такой манифест конфедерации, в котором говорится, что каждый отдельный репозиторий имеет ограниченную ценность для исследований. Реальная сила открытого доступа заключается в возможности подключения и связывания этих репозиториев, поэтому им нужна функциональная совместимость. И для достижения этого требуются дополнительные инвестиции в скоординированную инфраструктуру. Вот это были основные идеи. Сейчас мы можем перейти к вопросам. У нас буквально есть, не знаю, 1-2 минутки на вопросы. И у нас есть вопрос из аудитории. Paul, could you join us for the Q&A session? We have a question from the audience. Would you like to speak English or Russian?
Спасибо большое за такой концептуальный доклад. Как конкретно вы или ваш центр, который возглавляете, проводит вот эту политику открытости? В чем конкретно она проявляется? Первый и второй. Может быть, все-таки что-то должно остаться приватным, с вашей точки зрения, или все исключительно должно быть так?
The question from Anna Kashova, Associate Professor of Nizhegorodsky University. And the question is on the concrete practices from your institution related to open access. What's your effort, really practical ones in this direction? And the second point is about the privacy. Maybe something have to stay in the private domain and something should be kept in this area.
Thank you very much. That's a really good question. So in my institution, and again, every institution is quite different, but for example, we've had, last year we had an open access publishing scheme where researchers could apply to cover the cost of article processing charges. And I'm not sure if this is, if I'm using the same terminology, but this is the cost of publishing in open access journals. And sometimes that can be quite high. If you're in the sciences, that can be up to $10,000, for example, to publish in Nature. But in the humanities, it can be quite a lot less, maybe a couple of $100. Still a huge amount of money. And so the universities provided some of these practical supports. But that's actually quite unusual. And I think the bigger problem is that this responsibility to make our research more openly available is falling back on the researcher. So in the European Union, for example, there's a focus now on every bit of publicly funded research being made openly available as soon as it's ready to be published. And that's quite difficult. So, I can't remember the second part of the question, but this is the most important thing in my mind is the cost of it. So this is where the inequities are felt in different parts of the world or in different institutions, which mightn't be able to afford those costs to make publications open access. It used to be that publishers made back their money by selling books to libraries, and they still do that. But now publishers are also charging huge amounts of money to individual researchers or their institutions to be able to publish works in open access format. Yeah, so this is the big inequity, and it's the big problem.
About the privacy, what should stay private?
I think the privacy is a really important question, because, and I had a meeting about this today with our ethics committee. A lot of research involves either material that can't be exposed for legal reasons or privacy reasons, or otherwise can't be looked back upon and sort of opened up and because it was part of a research project and then it gets closed. And so open, I think, is a difficult term, because it makes it seem that like we want everything to be open, but what it really means is to make it as open as possible. And that could be within all sorts of legal restrictions, and that's often the case. It's especially the case for me working in Australia, where we do a lot of research with Aboriginal and Indigenous cultures, and most of that research can't be made available at all. That's completely blocked up. So really it's about identifying what research could be made available on more openly, and to whom, on what basis that can be shared. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think that due to the lack of time, we have to turn then. But I would like to motivate the participants to put the questions on chat, and maybe we can discuss just in a written form somehow. And now I would like to turn to the first session of the symposium, and it's devoted to the new concepts and technologies in interdisciplinary domains of history and culture. And I will give you the right, and we are very pleased that you agreed to chair the session, and we can start. Please, Paul, take your floor for the session.
Thank you very much, and thank you for chairing the opening session. I'm grateful for that, and for the audience and for the questions. So welcome to this first section on new concepts and technologies in interdisciplinary domains of history and culture. So the presenters will talk about their work for 10 minutes, and this will be followed by 5 minutes of questions and responses. The first two papers will be presented by Daria Vershinina in one presentation, as they relate to one project, as I understand it, and both talks are connected. And so that's the format that we'll follow. Daria is an associate professor in the Department of History and Archaeology at Perm State University, and she'll speak first on the topic of women's agenda in political protests across national analysis, and then talk next on the social portrait of female parliamentarians across national analysis. So I welcome you to present your paper.
We have some problems with my flashcard.
Okay. Well, we can wait.
Да, подключись туда. Через Zoom. Я
Через
пришлю
Zoom?
тебе сейчас ссылку.
То есть, нет, она у меня есть. То есть оттуда я
Да.
буду вам мешать же. У вас будет...
Мы отключим здесь.
Окей.
Сейчас ты заберешь.
Бывает, да.
It's an issue of the contemporary time, but connection of online and offline formats.
Главное, чтобы не фонило.
Я выключу.
Okay, I will use my laptop. Is everything okay with the sound, right?
Sounds good. I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I will tell you a little bit about our project because, yeah, both of my speeches will be devoted to one big research project which we developed for last 2 years. So we have this research, there were 4 of us, and we decided to think about women in politics and women in political activism. What we were interested in was the correlation between female activists who go to streets and speak about women's rights, and female politicians, especially in representative bodies of different countries. And we wanted to understand, is there any correlation between, you know, this world of politics and this world of political activism? And we wanted to select some countries in different regions of the world and compare even the ratio of female deputies of parliaments and female activists in, you know, in feminist issues. So we try to understand how activism can be correlated with, you know, the world of politics, and we were interested in whether, yeah, выключился.
The secondary is out of power, so we will be back soon.
I'm so sorry, for all this mess, but I'm going to continue, right? So we were interested in this correlation, and we wanted to understand, is there, any route for the activists just to become female deputies of the parliament? And for these purposes, we created the database, and you may see the code, and you may use, your phones just to go to our database, because I'm not going to show it. It's very, very huge. It consists of pretty many information about female politicians, and we created profiles of female politicians in the selected countries. And you see that we decided to select 6 countries, 2 from the Eastern Europe, and both Russia and Poland are now known for some sort of traditional values issues, and the politicians who are in power both in Poland and Russia are not eager to develop women's rights. Then we decided to take some countries from the Western Europe and the UK, Germany and Ireland. Three of these countries, they demonstrate different attitudes to the problem of women's rights. For example, in Germany, it's not very popular, and as we understood, for example, during protests on women's issues, the organizers of this protest usually expand the issue of the protest toward a wide, broader range of issues, for example, LGBT rights, anti-Semitism, etc., etc. And for example, Ireland is a very interesting example of the country which is very, very fast in providing women's rights. And also we took the USA because speaking about feminism, speaking about women's rights, speaking about women's issues, we can't ignore this country, especially when we go into the previous few years where the American issues, for example, the election of Donald Trump as the president of the USA was some kind of a trigger for female activism around the globe. So we created profiles of all the deputies of national parliaments, both chambers of the parliament in all 6 countries, and it was quite a huge work, actually, because we tried to find as much information about female politicians as we could, and I will tell you a little bit later about these profiles. Then also we created profiles of female grassroots activists, and we wanted to learn about, their biography, their activism before they started to talk about women's issues, etc., etc. We also looked at political parties programs, and we wanted to understand how women's issues are developed in these political parties programs, and so on. And also we wanted to understand how much women's issues are popular in grassroots activism, and if there is there any, huge amount of political process on this issue. So if you used our QR code, you could go to our file, and it is in Russian, but maybe it might be interesting and usable for those who are interested in how to work with profiles of female deputies of parliament, right? Did you get it? Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to go deeper into the first part of my speech about women's agenda in political protest in the selected 6 countries. So we wanted to analyze women's protests in these countries. We wanted to learn about their purposes, about their slogans, about their scale, both in time, in geography, in amount of participants. And we also were interested in whether these protests had or have any concrete political or social consequences. For example, the reaction of the government to any of these protests. We also wanted to identify the factors that determine how women's political mobilization takes place. What we were interested in, for example, was how women learn about protests, and not only women, but also men, because in these protests on female issues, both men and women could take part. And we were interested, in the process of organizing the protest. And as a result, we wanted to understand whether it is truth when many researchers right now speak about international feminist network, international feminist movement, and we wanted to understand whether it is truth or not. So speaking about women's agenda in political protest, and in this cross-national analysis, we analyzed information about political protests on women's issues for 5 years. We decided to take a period from 2017 to 2021, and the first date is directly connected with these very important, not only for America, but for the whole world, election of Donald Trump. And it really became like a factor in mobilizing pretty many women across the globe. So what we could find, we found that there were 59 protest actions on women's issues, according to open web resources. You may think that 59 protests for 5 years in 6 countries is not very, much, but still, I would like to say that not all of these actions were for one day, for example, or for one city. So pretty many of them were counted by us as one action, but actually they were, for example, country. The whole country was in this action, and the protest could last for a few days. So what we were interested in, we looked, and you may see in our database this information about the time, about geography, about number of participants of any political protest. We wanted to understand whether there was any political affiliation or social affiliation with different, social organizations or concrete political parties, or from those who were organizing or who were participating in these events. We wanted to know their motive, their slogans. Especially in Russian case, we were interested in legality or non-legality of the event. I think all who are from Russia know that during last 5 years, it became less and less freedom to organize political protests, and we were interested in whether they were legal or non-legal. We wanted to know about the reaction of power leaders, if possible, to identify and the consequences. So on this slide, you may see, the amount of protest actions in our countries, in our selected countries, and you may see that the most active, protests on women's issues during our period were in Poland and in Russia. And it might seem quite strange for you, because I think all of you know about Women's March in America, but the thing is that we count, for example, Women's March in January 2017 as one protest action with a huge amount of participants around the whole country. And that is why it is written on the slide that at least 17 protest actions were not concentrated in one city, but they were widespread on the territory of the whole country, or on the whole, or on one region. So actually in the USA, we have much more participants of protest actions on women's issues, but to count, the number, we may see that Poland and Russia became the leaders, and it's quite understandable for those who are interested in, women's rights issues, because both in Poland and Russia, we do have this tendency to, to go back to organize the sort of cultural backlash in women's rights, especially, and that is why feminists and women activists, they came to streets quite often. So speaking about organizing the events, we understood and we just found this information that all of these protests were organized by internet, and internet played and continues to play the main role in, in getting the crowd to the streets. But also it is really the truth then when the researchers say about the international agenda, because pretty many of the analyzed protests in 4 countries except Russia were connected to American women's agenda. So it was not only about Trump becoming president of the US, but it was also about Black Lives Matter, about transgender ban of Donald Trump, and so on and so forth. Speaking about the main issues which women were trying, to make loud, you may see this diagram and it shows that the abortion problem was the main issue for the third of our protests, and it continues to be the main. I think about this historic decision of U.S. Supreme Court to override Roe versus Wade, to ban abortion, to make legal for any state to ban abortion in the US. We didn't analyze protests of 2022, but this year shows that this issue still is the most important for women across the globe. Then violence, and for example, in Russia, especially domestic violence. And here in Russia, we have a very serious problem about domestic violence and, the legality of domestic violence, and also sexual harassment and Trump's policy. And you may see other issues. Some of the protests were not, directed to a concrete problem, but were, for example, in Germany, were connected with general, women's rights issues, not specifying the problem. And the conclusion for this first speech is that women's protests really tend to be international and universal in how they are organized, in what they demand. Even in Russia, where we didn't see any protests, on the election of Donald Trump, where female activists came to the streets of St. Petersburg or Moscow or other cities, for example, with the problem of domestic violence, it's usual for women, in different regions. 3 main issues are reproductive laws, domestic violence, and crimes against women. The organizers of the protests, which are connected with women's issues, look at the world, more critically in different other areas. And that is why they tend to expand the agenda to many other more wide problems, for example, LGBT rights or police brutality, which was quite important for Britain, especially in 2021, when a woman was killed in London by a police officer. Maybe you've heard of this awful situation. And the organizers are rarely connected with specific political parties, and female politicians rarely take part in protests. The only one exception is the United States of America, and the correlation between women's protests and Democratic Party. And really we saw by analyzing the protests that intersectionality, which was named as a core principle of new feminism in the late 20th century, still stays as its core principle. Intersectionality means global, scale, global issues, being not only a feminist, but being, for example, LGBT rights defender, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. it was about the first one. Do you want me to just continue with the second? Right? Okay. Вообще коротко это не про меня. Но не смогу я коротко. Well, Nadezhda asks me to be very, very concrete, but the problem is that we analyzed 59 protests, but 1,000 female deputies. So it's rather difficult, to be more specific here. Social portrait of female parliamentarians. So we wanted to compile the social portrait of a female deputy of parliament. We wanted to discuss how women in different countries, in the same countries, become the deputies of national parliaments. And we wanted to understand, what factors the main in getting women into national politics. And in our database, we created a huge, amount of profiles about women politicians. We went to leaders of political parties if they were female. We also analyzed, all the deputies of political parties in both chambers of national parliament. So in general, it is more than 1,000 entries. We analyzed all deputies, even if, for example, a woman was a deputy of the parliament only in 2017 or only in 2021. I mean, when, the election took place. So it's a huge amount of deputies, and the problem is that the websites of national parliaments, they usually have a very, very, small information about a deputy. For example, its party, or maybe the questions or committees which he or she goes to, maybe age and nothing more. So we used as much open web resources as we could find about these female deputies, and we try to understand their marital status, their number of children, their religious affiliation, if they pronounce it. We wanted to know their age, their education, their professional experience before entering the representative body of the country. And we also wanted to know their position in the party. We also wanted to find any correlation about between the amount of female deputies of the concrete party and, for example, the gender quotas in the country in general or in the party itself. So as a result, we understood that not very many young female politicians become, deputies of parliament. The average age is 53, and the youngest in the UK and Ireland are still 50, the median age, and in Russia and Germany about 53 and 54, and the oldest women MPs are in Poland and the US. So, educational background, professional experience really matters for becoming a deputy of national parliament. So the median age of female party leaders, it's very interesting, is a little bit less, 51. So if a woman, in politics is very active, she could become a party leader quite often. What was interesting for us was that we almost didn't find any LGBT, pretty many LGBT persons in the corpus of female deputies. So most of women who want to become a member of parliament, they pretend to be, a classic woman with a husband and with children. So only 6 of 748 women who just said something about their marital status, you know, their sexual orientation. Only 6 of them declared that they were LGBT persons. So it's not popular to be an open LGBT person and to provide, you know, a successful political career. So you may see that quite a lot of MPs, female MPs, are married, and almost 2/3 of female MPs have children, and 71% of female MPs in all 6 countries have 2 or more children. I do remember reading the biography of Mrs. Thatcher, where the biographer was talking about how lucky Mrs. Thatcher was to give a birth to 2 children, you know, once, because she could go to political career. Okay, conclusions. So, in general, I may say that the social profile of a female deputy is that she is a little over 50. She does have a high education. She has a specific professional background. For example, she works in the field of law, economics, education. She participated in party youth or regional organization, and it is especially the truth, for example, for European countries, for example, for Ireland, for Germany, for the United Kingdom. She is married and she has 2 children.
Paul, are you here with us?
Thank you very much for your talks. That's absolutely fascinating and really important research. So thank you. Now, I'm just looking at the time. I'm not sure how much time we have for questions right now, or whether we should proceed. Maybe you could give me some guidance on that, Nadezhda.
Can you repeat, please, because Nadezhda and I both switched off our microphones just not to make too noise here.
Yeah, I was just thanking you for your presentation and presentations. I think they were absolutely fantastic and really important. I'm just wondering about how much time we have at the moment for questions, or whether we should proceed to the next talks.
1 minute, for example, for one small question.
Yeah, excellent. Well, you've done a big job because you've had two talks, one after the other. So if there are any questions from the online audience or in person.
Yeah, there are 2 questions here. Okay.
I'm sorry. Is the statistic about women's corresponds to the statistic about public in whole? Do you understand, for example, 6 or 7% of LGBTQ corresponds to the in general statistic about?
We didn't have 6% of, you know, persons. It was 6 persons out of 1,014 deputies. But in general, speaking about LGBT people, there is, you know, a range from from 4% to maybe 9%. So obviously there should be a little bit more, you know, LGBT persons in the corpus of female deputies. But in Russia, in Poland, and in Ireland, they either live or lived the life in the circumstances which were, you know, quite angry and quite hostile for LGBT persons. Speaking, for example, for Ireland, because it was quite a Catholic country during the whole second half of the 20th century, and only in the 1990s, Ireland became, you know, more progressive towards both women and LGBT. And that is why many of these women and maybe many of the men who participate in Irish politics, they were, born and raised in a country with hostility to LGBT person.
And about education.
Yeah, I may say that for sure, for example, in Russia, the amount of female deputies with higher education in our State Duma and, in both chambers of our Federal Assembly is much more higher than the amount of female, of women with higher education in Russia. So to become a deputy in Russia, almost needs to be a person not only with higher education, but pretty many of them are, well, in Russian we have candidates of science or doctors of science, and I think that for political parties in Russia especially, and the same situation is in Germany, the science, the academic environment is the source to take people for national politics, and it's very interesting. But none of them in Russia were connected with feminism or grassroots activism. Political parties do not look to this field to take to find people, to engage people in politics. So especially in nowadays Russia, these two fields, I mean, grassroots activism on women's issue also, and world of politics, they are not interconnected at all.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question, that response. We could speak for a long time about all of these issues, which is what's so good about this session. There are so many interesting talks. So we should move on. Thank you very much, Daria, for that. So the third, can you hear me okay over there? Yeah, okay. The third talk in our program will be given by Viktor Varkinov, Director of the Scientific and Education Center Archaeological Research of the Sevastopol State University. And I'm very grateful for your presentation and welcome you.
Well, thank you. I will speak without the camera. Do you hear me? I hear me. Do you hear me?
I can see your screen, but it sounds a little bit quiet. Maybe you need to make the volume louder.
Louder. Can I speak louder? Okay. Do you hear me as I speak louder? Okay. Well,
You can do, but we should check that everybody can hear you, because it still sounds soft for me.
We can hear. I need a few minutes.
I can hear you, but it sounds like it's a bit quiet. But how does that sound to the audience there?
Okay, I need a few minutes. Can you hear me? Okay, no?
Okay, I think it still might be a bit quiet. Maybe you could look at that from your end.
Okay.
Yes, it's a common issue for all of us. We can't hear.
So maybe while we're sorting out those audio issues, the title of the presentation is Application of Innovative Geophysical Technologies for the Creation of Geographic Information Systems for Underwater Archaeological Sites, which I'm looking forward to learning more about.
What do you think if we switch to the next talk and then move back to this one, the third one? That would be a solution, I think.
We could do that if that's effective. Should we? I'm happy to introduce the next speaker if they're available. Is Anna available online?
Yes.
Great. Would you be prepared to speak now, and then we can follow up with the other presenter next?
Vielleicht. Can I speak about my theme? Надежда?
Yeah. I can introduce you now, if you'd like to give your talk now.
Okay. Everybody listen me.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Anna Kosmovskaya, who's a research assistant at Perm State Institute of Culture, and she'll speak on the topic of the problem of arrears in the poll tax of local provincial officers in Prikamye in the 18th century. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for my English, I prefer speak Deutsch, and this will be a big experience for me. No, what about my work? The tax system of the state is the basis of its existence. A criterion for the successful completion of tax reform can be considered the timely and full receipt of payment to the budget. The poll reform was one of the most important financial measures of Peter I, which had an impact on the socio-economic sphere of the Russian Empire. In addition to the main purpose, the regular replenishment of the army budget, this government event made possible to record and control residents. The poll tax collection system was what was created proved to be terrible, and with some change lasted for almost 150 years. During the implementation of the reform, not only the transition to a new capitation principle of taxation was carried out, but also all categories of the population of the state were taken into account. Question of the socio-economic significance of the poll reform and its impact on finances can be studied on the basis of original material. A study of the presence or absence of arrears in a poll tax in Prikamye makes possible to analyze how successfully and timely a collection of funds was in separate, removed from the central districts. In my report, poll tax payments on the territory of Prikamye are studied, and the effectiveness of the work of local government is assessed. The chronological framework of the study is determined by the dates of the function of local provincial offices after the transfer of functions for accounting for the poll taxes to them. Prikamye as a part of the Kazan province from the 1727 until the creation of the Perm Vicegerency in 1781. The full reform in Russia was planned in advance. The government studied the European experience of Peter I, considered various options for taxation. Former household taxation in the conditions of constant hostilities in the Northern War did not compensate for the cost of the army and navy. most of preparatory work to clarify the population, the deployment of regiment, and the organization of new population registration bodies was complete by the spring of 1725. After checking the data, the regiment were assigned to specific territories, the inhabitants of which all had to maintain a military unit. Certificates of the number of souls on our records from the provincial offices arrived as the central authorities as early as 1728. And during the 18th century, revisions of the population were carried out. The number of souls were recalculated, and sums of the poll tax were also revised during the period under study. And possible to study the collection of the poll tax in the three districts of Prikamye. Here is Solikansky, Чердынский, and Kungursky. Here is a problem of calculation the tax base. Why I have a lot of problem to calculate these taxes, because the amount of the poll tax was not recorded in the reporting documentation used by the until the third revision, and the under half of 18th century, the underpayment was written off, списывались, forgiven and no longer charged by the government. No, it's possible to draw conclusion of the whole province on the material of Prikamye if there are data only on a part of the district within it. We can this data will be not representative, real, and another problem: the chance of a peasant to work at factories. This was a project of Peter I, and tax arrears could be real or nominal. For example, if money was simply paid elsewhere and local provincial officers wrote about additional payment, this problem was discussed in the interdepartmental correspondence. At the last, most typical point in the analysis of documentation should be checked with data for several years. To the nominal of formal shortage of payment should be written down. There was non-payments which existed no more than 1 year, because the additional payment could be compensated during the next year, and the local chancellery could send the statements with its presence to a higher authority. This situation is very typical in Russia. What about sources? I worked in Moscow in special archives with different materials. These were register, receipts, expenditure books, sheets, accounts, and a lot of another material. When the Perm wide agency was created, local authorities felt the need for detailed accounts of all types of taxes and dues. What about the number of tax payers? These districts, and here's a revision in 18th century. 10%, of course. And about results. Below we will analyze a number of documents characterizing the payment of a poll tax in Prikamye. The book of income and expenditure of local institution in this time said that money came regularly, and we are not talking about underpayments in the documentation so far, only about the balance. Important information about the underpayment of the poll tax, and they are almost final for a long period, are presented in the material of local offices related to the reporting in 1780. On the basis of this information, we can trace underpayment of poll tax and its causes in Prikamye for almost 20 years. Here is a population. Here is non-payment reasons and sums. Significant annual debts in the local provincial Perm chancellery in the study period was not recorded. Individual episodes of non-payments are related to external factors. For example, changes in legislation, no problem with the purchase of peasants to factories and essentially of their status. No, for example, Emelian Pugachev rebellion and a violation of logistics during the battles. And the material available to the author characterize them and underpayment of the poll tax for almost the entire period under study. The analysis data show a high level of collection of the poll tax in Prikamye. Separate episodes with non-payment are associated with the problems of peasants' assignment to factories and the owner's responsibility for them. The study allows us to draw conclusions about the effective system of money collection in the provincial institution of Prikamye. Local provincial offices, together with representatives of the army, successfully performed their fiscal function. That's all. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions, no, please, you can write these questions in chat because I understand good nur Deutsch. Dankeschön.
Thank you, Anna, for your presentation. That was fantastic. And do we have any questions online or in person?
I just put the question on chat.
Yeah. The completeness of the data. Is it possible to assess? It's a good question.
Okay.
You could expand if you want.
Can I speak Russian, for example? No, I try, but yes, we can. It is possible, but not in a long time, because I have no special data, for example, to part of 18th century. This это связано с сохранностью данных. Our central institution worked not good in 18th century, and we have a lot of lacunes, пробелы in this time. But I have exact, точное, точное количество людей. Here, the number of sex player is correct. I think it's correct. And this population of Prikamye, male souls, is too correct on the ну, надеюсь, я ответила.
Thank you. It's clear to me, and I just think how the archives can work better in making the knowledge and the historical resources more accessible. That would be so great. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for your talk, and I think we can now return to our previous speaker. I can see
yes,
you there.
thank you very much. I'm sorry for some mistakes in my region. It's a special problems with Zoom, but I used my iPhone, so I ready to make my speech. So I will speak.
You've made a way around it, so welcome. Okay, I'll turn off now. You can give your talk.
I will choose my demonstration. Geographic information systems have been actively used in all archaeological areas in the last decades. They provide the special component of traditional database structures, allowing us to collect, store, analyze, and visualize geographic data effectively. The research of cultural heritage sites in the waters of the Crimea has acquired a particular prevalence in connection with the active economic development of the territory. In addition, nature and anthropogenic factors lead to the gradual destruction of underwater archaeological sites, which aim to monitor the constantly digitalization of marine archaeology. In this connection has really great potential. The water area of Sevastopol, the city of federal importance, extends from the Cape Lukul to Cape Sarvich and is full of underwater significant sites of different periods, including ancient eras submerged by the sea. The most remarkable is the western coast of the Quarantine Bays, where now situated there one of the most famous, important archaeological sites, Taurik Chersonesus. The introduction of GIC is becoming more relevant for underwater archaeology. This is one of the tools for spatial analysis of both a single archaeological object and a whole complex of sites of different times in a certain area. At the moment, there are no similar geoinformation portals for the Black and Azov Sea, which contain the data about underwater culture heritage. Underwater archaeology has recently absorbed the latest methods and technical means for studying the sea bottom. However, the most of the digital information collected during underwater expeditions remains inaccessible to most specialists. The data sets obtained with the modern underwater archaeological research are various. Remote methods of underwater archaeology are widely used nowadays. This is why they make it possible to identify archaeological sites at the sea bottom. The leading role belongs to the hydroacoustic observation systems, which include site scansowners, sub-bottom profilers, and multi-beam sounders. In the coastal area, our results are obtained from the analysis of the satellite images and the survey from UAV. Hydroacoustic methods allow us to survey quickly and effectively large bottom areas with high spatial resolution. On the basis of hydroacoustic data, bathymetric maps are compiled and the place of diving operations for visual inspections and photographing, including also using photogrammetry methods to detect objects are obtained. At the stage of underwater archaeological excavations, one of the tasks is the accurate record of all objects which were found underwater using mapping and photogrammetry methods. Photogrammetric methods make it possible not only to record the stages of earthworks and archaeological remains at their place of occurrence, but also to obtain 3D images on the most significant finds with future cameral processing. Hydroacoustic methods in many cases are limited in their ability to see objects located deep in the marine sediments, thickness due to the high acoustic radiality of the bottom surface and the presence of multiplier reflections in seismoacoustic waves. A promising method for underwater archaeological research in the coastal area of electrical tomography, AT. This method makes it possible to study the structure of the cultural layers of monuments to a considerable depths, significantly expanding the capabilities of underwater archaeologists. This method is especially effective for the relevant constructions remains hidden in the bottom sediments, flooded as a result of transgression process. In 2022, Sevastopol State University launched the project Marine Culture Landscapes, Digital Archaeological Atlas of Chersonesus. The main area for this project is the produced for identifying and registering the culture heritage site, the plant of building structures of Tauric Chersones and the culture layer in the Quarantine Bay, which occurred in 2020 with an area more than 10,000 square meters. Poor visibility in the water, shallow depths and topography of the bottom make it difficult to obtain information about
Пожалуйста, Виктор, у нас слайды не меняются, у нас до сих пор первый, и режим не презентации, а как картинки, как слайды.
Что мне нажать, чтобы была презентация?
Расширьте слово. То есть или вот так, да, или так. Да.
Я просто еще не перешел к следующей картинке, все нормально. Но я уже к середине подошел. Okay, I'm sorry. I speak about poor visibility, shallow water, the main problems for archaeological fixations for modern archaeologists. So we propose to use new innovative new methods for archaeological explorations. The materials obtained during this period include not only the archaeological finds and data on the spatial arrangements of the remains of building structures visible at the bottom. A survey of water area was carried out using side-scan sonar, 3C SSS, and seismoacoustic profiling, SEP method. In 2021, in addition to hydroacoustic methods and innovative methods of bottom electrotomography was applied. So were one of the first pioneers which used this method according to underwater archaeology. The optimal sets of marine geophysical methods for creating GIC system for underwater monuments in Quarantine Bay include the following types and works. They're surveyed by the side-scan sonar, the continuous seismoacoustic profile, and the bottom electrotomography. So on the left side, you see the results of side-scan sonar. Within the coastal area of the bay, the surface of each type of work was carried out according to its own systems of profiles. The complex of geophysical observations covered the area, which includes all known archaeological sites in the coastal part of Quarantine Bay. The bottom electrotomography results are displayed in the form of geoelectric sections and maps that characterize the distribution of electrical resistivity in sub-bottom sediments of a depth of approximately 10 meters from the sea surface. The obtained geoelectric sections are summarized and a 3D bottom electrotomographic data cube. Based on the obtained digital array, which forms a 3D cube, geoelectric slice maps were constructed for a depth of 3 or 5 meters from the sea surface, presented in this image. The basis of the archaeological interpretation of underwater research materials is the joint analysis of information obtained by various methods of geophysics. For the convenience of a comprehensive analysis of materials, a summary map has been synthesized, which combines interpretation scheme built according to the side scan sonar data, sub-bottom profile and bottom electrotomography methods, and underwater archaeological research, visual research. The basis of the GIC system for underwater archaeological and geophysical research is the joint presentation of material obtained by various methods of marine geophysics and underwater archaeology. The GIC structures is formed by the digital images of the obtained results in the form of cartographic layers from the right side of underwater archaeological sites such as Chersonesus Tauricus. Layers in a geoinformation system are represented as a single geographic coordinate systems. Thank you for your attention and sorry for some mistakes. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much for your presentation and also
Maybe
for
some
being
questions.
you've been able to swap over to the phone rather than the computer. If there's a quick question in the audience, we'd be happy to take that.
There is a question from the audience, so I'll invite you to ask directly. But please stick English in answering the question. Слышно? Да.
Да, Виктор, спасибо за ваш интересный доклад. Пол за нам в своем пленарном выступлении поставил такие рамки открытой науки, да, рассказал о них. А вот скажите, пожалуйста, считаете ли вы, что ваше исследование как-то может найти выход в рамках вот этого самого открытых данных? То есть будут ли потом результаты ваших исследований в карантинной бухте представлены онлайн?
Спасибо за хороший вопрос. Мы не случайно говорили про геоинформационные системы, ведь, собственно, идея заключается в пополнении данных таких геоинформационных систем. Другой вопрос, с которым мы столкнулись в этом году, что не все данные геоинформационные с привязками к точкам мы могли публиковать по определенным причинам условий этого года, особенно в нашем регионе, где мы живем, поскольку в карантинной бухте в том числе базируются базы военных кораблей. Но, тем не менее, в будущем, после налаживания той ситуации, которая у нас сейчас происходит, конечно, мы будем всячески наполнять эту информационную систему и иметь открытые данные, как минимум, на порталах органов охраны объектов культурного наследия. Ведь с прошлого года появилась возможность органам субъектов ставить подводные археологические памятники на государственный учет, чего раньше в истории Российской Федерации не было. И сейчас будет массовая постановка таких памятников, соответственно, со всеми вытекающими факторами по охране данных объектов, в том числе запросы о наличии, отсутствии объектов культурного наследия на участках акваторий. Поэтому геоинформационные системы для чиновников, которые не видят эти объекты вживую, под водой, конечно же, являются очень перспективным в будущем, ну, уже и в будущем. Спасибо.
Спасибо, Виктор.
I have to remind that the session have to be led in English because it will be checked by the Springer publisher. So I would like to ask one more question regarding your work and I would like to clarify the thing just, do you use these methods as a preliminary methods for pre-excavation phase? Or you already use a combination of them and already tried just underwater archaeology? I mean, the excavation phase in general.
Okay. Thank you. So we have two stages of archaeological survey. It's a real survey, archaeological survey, and the second, archaeological excavations. So these methods, it's methods of non-destructive archaeological survey. One of the, with the complex with another methods, hydroacoustic and geophysics. But usually in Russia and in Europe, we use the three methods: magnetometry as geophysical methods, sub-bottom profiling, and scan sonar. So we proposed and became to use the new innovative methods. It's electrotomography. We checking these methods in quarantine way and has a good checking results. So we propose to use these methods also with another methods.
Looks like it's a very efficient approach, and I wish you good luck with your research and the real excavation in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I think now we're going to move on to the next speaker. In fact, there are two speakers, if I'm correct, in this session. Vyacheslav Vershinina is a research laboratory assistant at the Center for Social and Humanitarian Informatics at the Immanuel Kant Baltic Federal University in Kaliningrad. And the second presenter is Denis Zherebatchev, who's a senior lecturer, Department of Historical Informatics at Moscow State University. So we have one presenter, as I understand it, who is offline, or in person rather, and then the other who is online. And so I welcome you, and they will speak on the topic of the creation of the digital model of the philosopher Immanuel Kant's house in Königsberg.
We are proposing the simultaneous translation. So the first speaker will start in Russian, and I'll give a summary per slide.
Добрый день, коллеги. Вот. Совместно с Балтийским федеральным университетом имени Канта, совместно с сотрудниками кафедры МГУ имени Ломоносова был реализован проект по реконструкции дома Иммануила Канта в Кёнигсберге, который был снесен в 1893 году.
This project is maintained by Baltic Federal University and the Department of Historical Informatics of Moscow State University, and it's devoted to the reconstruction of the house of philosopher Immanuel Kant in Königsberg.
Этот проект был поддержан Российской федеральной академической программой «Приоритет 2030» ВФУ имени Иммануила Канта.
The project is supported from the fund, and you can see it on the screen.
Как известно, всемирно известный философ Иммануил Кант жил и родился, и, в принципе, и умер в городе Кёнигсберге. Он прожил там всю жизнь. В 1783 году, недалеко от замка, он купил дом, в котором жил и преподавал до самой своей смерти в 1804 году.
The philosopher, he was born and he spent all his life in Königsberg, and in 1783 he bought this house nearby the royal castle, and he lived in this house by his death in 1904. So after his death, the house was rebuilt several times, and then it was fully destroyed in 1893.
Мы попытались на основе всех доступных источников, которые могли найти, реконструировать дом, восстановить, вот, и использовать при этом новые технологии, 3D-визуализации и моделирования.
So the researchers tried to reconstruct the house using all the available resources and also a set of digital technologies, including 3D modeling and digital visualizations.
Для своей работы мы использовали такое программное обеспечение. Прежде всего, это Autodesk 3D Max. Вот, так как он позволяет создать сложную геометрию, наложить любого вида текстуры и на основе этого сделать достаточно хорошую визуализацию.
3D Max is a software used to build a really precise shape and geometry of the reconstructed object, and also it helps to visualize the materials and textures to make the visualization more realistic.
Также использовали программу Adobe Photoshop, которые делали текстуры для 3D Max.
Adobe Photoshop was in use for creating the high-quality textures.
Программа CorelDRAW, которые делали чертежи и схемы.
CorelDRAW was in use to create the plans and schemes.
И программа Marvelous Designer, которая позволяла создавать нам предметы 3D-моделирования ткани, одежду и прочие объекты.
Marvelous Designer was in use to create clothes and t-shirts on the basis of simulation.
Вот, перед вами вы видите модель 3D-модель сахарницы 18 века, а также ее визуализацию.
And here you can have a look at the sugar bowl produced in 18th century, and at the bottom of the slide you can see its reconstruction.
Создание цифровой модели дома. Вот, дом был реконструирован на основе немногочисленных источников, их осталось очень мало. Основной источник – это план Куртке, который был создан на основе земельных книг, а также гравюры и немногочисленные фотографии позднего периода дома.
The following resources were used to create 3D model of the house, and the house was reconstructed on the basis of the map of Krutka, gravures, and some photographs from the later period. So you can see these photos on the screen.
Перед вами видите уже цифровую модель дома, это она в программе 3D Max.
And you can see the model of the house created in 3D Max.
Тоже модель дома уже с наложением текстур.
The same model of the house with textures.
Перед вами уже визуализация экстерьера дома Иммануила Канта с видом с улицы Принцессенштрассе, где он находился. На заднем плане виден Королевский замок.
And here you can see the visualization of exterior of the house from the Princessstrasse street.
И вид дома со стороны сада.
And this is the backward view of the house from the garden.
Следующий этап – это реконструкция предметов, личных вещей, мебели, дома и музыканта.
The model includes also the reconstruction of the personal belongings of the philosopher and furniture.
К сожалению, к настоящему времени из личных вещей именного Канта осталось всего два известных предмета. Это фужер с гравировкой и бульонная пара. Все остальные вещи, ну, насколько известно, были уничтожены или погибли.
Unfortunately, not much left from the original objects, and there are just the glass with engraving belong to Kant, and also the soup bowls, and which included the portrait of Immanuel Kant painted during his life.
Перед вами секретарь комод, реконструированный на основе фотографии из музея Канта в Королевском замке в Кенигсберге. Этот музей был уничтожен в результате бомбардировки в 1944 году. Все предметы погибли.
And here you can see the sample of furniture from his house, and unfortunately they were stored in the building that was destroyed during the Second World War, and they do not exist anymore.
Перед вами модель, реконструкция бульонной пары, которую я уже упоминал. Это слева фотография из музея в Люненбурге, а справа 3D-модель.
It's so-called soup bowl or soup couple, which includes two objects in one, and you can see here the original exhibit from the museum, and also to the right the original, the created 3D model, the reconstruction.
Перед вами тарелка, которая из музея, точнее фрагмент тарелки из музея в Калининграде и ее реконструкция.
And here you can see the reconstruction, the real plate decorated from that time, and it's a reconstruction. So you can see the fragments that were rebuilt.
3D-модели реконструкции прижизненных изданий Иммануэла Канта, а также монеты того периода.
And here you can see the publications by Immanuel Kant created during his life, and a set of coins.
Реконструкция одежды, это камзол, а также ночная рубашка, которая упоминается во многих источниках Иммануэла Канта, треуголка, а также трубка курительная и из слоновой кости, как называется, для табака, в общем, табакерка, да, табакерка.
And here on the slide you can see the clothes and its reconstruction, including the famous night suit belonged to him, and also his hat and smoking specific things.
Известны по источникам предметы, которыми пользовался Кант, это ступка, а также мутарница. Кант лично готовил горчицу, известную по всему Кенигсбергу.
And here you can see the culinary stuff devoted to creation of mustard, and it was handmade and quite famous during his time.
Хочу сказать, что все вот эти предметы созданы на основе глубокого изучения источников, вот, и с анализом всех кантоведов, которые работали над этим проектом.
All these objects were reconstructed under the deep understanding of the historical sources, and also under consultations with the specialists on Kant and his life.
Следующий этап это было создание интерьерной визуализации.
The next step is the visualization of the interiors.
Для визуализации использовалась масса источников, как гравюры, так и письменные источники, воспоминания различные, а также по совету, например, профессора Штарка использовались музеи, например, музей Вагнера в Германии, ну и другие источники.
The authors used the complex of historical resources to reconstruct the interior, including engravings, letters, memoirs, and the objects from the museums, including the Museum of Wagner.
Перед вами известная картина Эмиля Дершинга «Обед у Канта». Она явилась, наверное, основным источником для создания столовой Канта.
This is the famous painting created by Emil Derkling, and it was in use to reconstruct the interiors of the house.
Перед вами визуализация столовой Канта.
And here you can see the result of this visualization in digital format.
Хочу заметить, здесь очень часто упоминалось, что стены у Канта были грязными. Мы постарались передать это в визуализации.
It's important to mention that the walls, it's mentioned in the multiple historical resources that the walls were dirty in his house, so the researchers tried to show it in their reconstruction.
Перед вами визуализация библиотеки и в дальнейшем спальной комнаты Канта. В источнике упоминается, что он в последнее время спал именно в библиотеке.
And this visualization is devoted to the library and at the same time the bedroom of the philosopher, because the sources mention that he used to sleep in the library in the last years.
Перед вами визуализация рабочего кабинета Канта.
And there is a home office of a philosopher, and it's a visualization as a reconstruction.
Вот. И визуализация аудитории Канта, которая была на первом этаже, о ней было очень много упоминаний, но, к сожалению, очень мало значимых.
And this is the lecture room at the first floor of his house, but unfortunately this room, it's uneasy to reconstruct fully because it was mentioned a lot, but nothing about how it looked like. And the first part of this talk has been finished. You please stay, останьтесь тут. And the second part will be pronounced by Denise, and I hope he can be in the audience. Just let us know if you are here. I can't see actually in the list of participants. I'll check. Нет. Среди нету. I would like to propose to make a pause a little bit. I mean, just not the pause. How to stop the sharing screen? I think that we can proceed with the questions to the author, to the presenter, because the paper, and we do not have another presenter. Please come here. Are you okay about turning to the questions? Идите сюда, да и все. Громко просто, дай.
This is actually a fascinating project. I look forward to the questions. Thank you for your presentation. Do we have questions in the chat? I'm just having a look. Or are there questions that are coming from the audience?
Yes, there is a question from the audience, and I think it will be Russian, and then I'll translate. And there is a hand up in the chat, but first the audience.
Замечательная реконструкция, она, безусловно, нужна для понимания каких-то жизненных обстоятельств Канта. А у меня такой вопрос. Дом вообще был очень приличный, каменный, двухэтажный. Судя по этому дому, что мы можем сказать о благосостоянии философа? Мне кажется, он был не бедным человеком.
По тем источникам, которые мы изучили, он был далеко не бедным человеком. Надо сказать, что о философе известно очень мало, и источники набросали его личность очень многогранно. Начнем с того, что он любил женщин, он любил играть в бильярд, он любил играть в карты на деньги. Вот. И надо сказать, что сумма, которую он заплатил за покупку этого дома, была достаточно крупная. Вот. Поэтому он жил такой определенной жизнью, но о нем много неизвестно. Но человек он был достаточно разносторонний, и деньги он имел.
А источники доходов?
Ну, прежде всего, когда он был молодым, он работал учителем. Когда стал приват-доцентом в университете, он получал достаточно приличную сумму. Кроме того, вот эту аудиторию, которую он показывал, он давал другим профессорам как лекторный зал. Очень многие профессора читали в университете, потому что университет в средние века был достаточно такой своеобразным, а у себя на домах. И Кант оборудовал на первом этаже лекторный зал, куда помещал до 30 студентов, и они туда приходили. И есть сохранились письма, которые просьбы профессоров о предоставлении этой аудитории для своих лекций.
Предприимчивый философ.
Кроме того, у него было достаточно друзей богатых, которые делали ему подарки, те же самые книги, которые у него были, а книги были очень дорогие в средние века. У него было очень много книг от книгопечателей, ему подарили книги. И надо сказать, что Кант к ним относился не очень внимательно. Они были перекручены, переписаны, иногда там сброшены, где-то валялись под столом, насколько известно.
Спасибо.
The question was about well-being of the philosopher and the main resources for his income, and it was summary of being associate professor at the university and teacher first, and then also he was okay to sell the books just presented to him. So I think we can move forward to the next question.
У меня такой вопрос. Очень интересная презентация. Вот это где представлена данная 3D-модель? Это будет на сайте, либо это будет отдельный сайт, либо это будет сайт этого дома. То есть это как люди могут с ней ознакомиться?
Так, а можно повторить?
Где находится реконструкция сама? Можно ли ее посмотреть?
Реконструкция на первой странице, там был QR-код этой реконструкции. К сожалению, должен был выступать Денис, и он должен был свою часть рассказать, но он, к сожалению, не появился. Я это расскажу тогда, свою часть, что на основе вот этой нашей визуализации было создано в начале панорамы. Эти панорамы были сведены потом Денисом в виртуальную экскурсию. Виртуальная экскурсия работает, сейчас она на сайте нашего университета, есть QR-код, на который можно посмотреть, погулять. Там есть сопровождение звуковое на двух языках, на русском и на английском. Можно посмотреть, практически весь дом мы сделали, за исключением только, может быть, комнаты Лемки не сделали, комнаты кухарки. Там и кухня, там и столовая, там и обеденный зал, там практически все. Еще раз повторяю, что мы максимально можно, насколько возможно, придерживались тех источников, которые есть. То есть взяли все, нашли все, что можно, и использовали все, что можно. К сожалению, очень мало чего осталось, фотографий тогда не было, сделали как могли.
The question referred to the to the next part of the talk, which was missed actually, and the reconstruction is available online, and you have a look. I will put in a minute into the chat, and the reconstruction is absolutely fantastic, and you can freely access and to move through the building.
Можно первую страницу презентации, там QR-код есть.
Вы мне скинете ссылку, я напечатаю.
I think that now we can move to our final speaker, if that's acceptable. Is that my understanding, that we're moving to the last speaker in our section? Alina? Oh, hello. Oh, it's so nice to see you. We know each other in person, so that's really good. So our final speaker in this section is Alina Yechlakova. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Interdisciplinary Historical Research at Perm State University. and she's going to be speaking on the topic of formation of the Siberian Army's image in periodicals. We'll explain more about her topic.
Thank you very much. Demonstration. Just a minute, please. Just a second, please. I'm sorry. Надо расшарить. Thank you very much. The confrontation between the opposing parties in the Civil War of 1917 to 1922 took the form not only hostilities but also a media war. Campaigning was an effective means of winning over members of the public, and newspapers were an important instrument of propaganda. Various political forces used the press as a tool to form images of themselves and their opponents. The first attempts to research the image of the whites date back to the early 1990s, when a significant number of works were published. However, those papers put the main emphasis on the building of the image of the enemy by the Soviet authorities, or on the image of the white movement in fiction. Researchers have scarcely examined the construction of images of the Siberian army from the inside through publication in white press. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in the use of geographic information systems in historical research, in particular for representing the cause of hostilities and their consequences. However, researchers rarely turn to periodicals as the main source for creating a geographic information system, focusing their attention on official records and statistical data. We must emphasize there were many white forces with differences in ideology and political program, and they were only nominally united by a common goal of destroying Bolsheviks. Newspapers, Свободная, Perm, Современная, Perm, and Отечество took it in turn to be the unofficial press organ of the People's Freedom Party. The newspapers was an important channel of communication with the public, capable of shaping images and moods, as well as a campaigning of propaganda mouthpiece. One of the important goals of media campaigning was the creation of images of the opposing parties, a positive image of the Siberian troops and a negative one for the Red Army. The hostilities between the Red and White armies were covered under a variety of headings. After Kolchak's troops took the city of Perm, the newspapers resumed their work. They regularly published telegrams under such headings as war events, later war telegrams, and other. The telegrams named the directions and areas of hostilities and the contested factories or factory towns, villages, and cities. Such articles made a wide use of a stylistic devices, cliches, and tropes to create an image of successful military operations of the Siberian army and the failures of the enemy. The articles often use such cliches as a powerful blow to the Reds, succession actions of our valiant troops, successful offensive, and others. If the operation was successful, the articles usually listed the exact number of Reds losers and captured trophies. For example, trophies: over 1,000 prisoners, 4 guns, over 6,000 rifles, 7 machine guns, 3 mobile kitchens, 70 telephones, 6,000 cartridges, 69 boxes of shell, artillery horses, and convoy. However, these figures often raise doubts. The text could use very tiny comparison, including those with historical allusions. For instance, in number 11 of January 11, 1919 claims that the Perm operation is the best example of such tactics, reviving the heroism of Napoleonic wars. Number 44 of March has the following comparison. For the Reds, the Battle of Tmysovaya and Posolskaya stations on the Eastern Front were the decisive Battle of Borodino. Short news items covered not only military operations of both sides, but also the state of the Red Army and its ammunitions. Articles also contained strongly based epithets of the opponents themselves, the Red despots, for a speedy overthrow,
of the monstrous yoke. To describe the opponent's failures, the articles traditionally use such phrases as the adversary was repulsed and sustained heavy losses, retreated to its old positions, and others. As the Siberian army advanced, more and more publications reported about red soldiers defecting to it, sometimes along with their commanders and as entire units. The publications tried to show that lack of public support for the Bolsheviks and to prove that even the protest in the territories controlled by Kolchak would not have occurred without the instructions of the Petrograd leaders of the Bolsheviks. Military operations were covered in analytical articles, in regular newspaper sections, military review and on military operations, and in editorials and thematic articles. Analytical articles could contain the author reflections and of the situation in a specific sector of the front, or justify the necessity of hold or occupy some territory. They often dwelt on the position of troops in different areas and their future missions in more detail than in the telegrams. Less often, information about military events can be found in other types of articles. This could be literary memoirs, eyewitness accounts, reprints from the other publications. The newspapers published obituaries of the officers who died on the front of the Civil War, and if prominent public figures killed by the Bolsheviks, making an abundant use of value judgments. The most commonly used phrases were brutally murdered by the Bolsheviks. Analyzing the topics of newspapers publications, one can observe the shift of their author's attention from certain military events to others, and the emergence of new topics as the situation changed. Perm operation, the capture of Kungur, Akhansk, Osa, Glazov were given a detailed and colorful description in the newspapers. The Siberian army's victory and capture of the cities were featured both in separate articles, eyewitness accounts, and in materials reprinted from other newspapers. Even when troops suffered setbacks, the newspapers went on to refute the rumors and paint a picture of the successful actions of the Liberation Army supported by the Western powers. The coverage of the advance of the Siberian troops has some interesting peculiarities. The thematic sections mention specific settlements, volosts, uyezd, and directions. We used this information to create a chart of the frequency of references to hostilities in different uyezd of the Eastern Front. This data was then used to create a map in ArcGIS. The map shows the uyezd of Perm, Vyatka, Ufa, Orenburg, Kazan, Samara provinces, and the frequency of their mentions in the newspapers under consideration. The background color indicated the number of mentions for the entire period of newspaper publications, while the histogram showed the frequency of mentions by month. Analyzing the map, we can see that in general, over the period from January to June 1919, Glazov, Akhansk, and Tsarapol uyezds were most often mentioned, which can be explained both by the intensity of the fighting in those areas and their geographical proximity to Perm, where the newspapers were published. With a lower but still noticeable frequency, they published information on the hostilities in the South Urals. In April, the newspapers also covered the advance of the Russian army towards the Volga River and its subsequent withdrawal in May due to the counter-offensive of the Red Army. Apparently, the frequency of references to specific geographical objects in the topical headings corresponds to the advance of the Russian army and counter-offensive of the Red Army, which indicated a good level of the journalist awareness. The most noticeable device for constructing the propaganda images was the constantly repeated phrases, words, and discourses used in newspapers' articles. Some of the articles were purely propaganda-oriented. Describing the operation of the Siberian army, the newspapers used numerous emotional and evaluative expressions, creating a highly positive image, encouraging the reader to support the troops and striving to cause an emotional uplift in the readers. The Siberian troops are most frequently referred to as ours, valiant, while success and successful are the most frequent epithets for military operations. The newspapers stressed the talents of the unit commanders and the strength of the troops that could withstand even the most fierce and persistent attacks. The newspapers often published detailed accounts on the activities of Kolchak and his speeches. At first, they expounded his political platform. The political platform of the supreme ruler Alexander Kolchak is well known: the destruction of Bolshevism, the strengthening of military forces for this purpose, and ultimately reorganizing the country on the basis of law and freedom through the National Assembly. In contrast, the enemy received an extremely negative assessment, both in terms of military leadership, army morale, and the management of occupied territories. The most common phrase to characterize the enemy's actions was Bolsheviks' atrocities. The newspapers accused the Bolsheviks of both marauding and murders. Another fairly common description of the Bolsheviks concerned the use of terror as a primary instrument of bending people into submission. Conclusions. Positive image contributed to the high number of volunteers joining the army, although the form of recruitment was clearly insufficient and was followed by forces mobilization. When the Siberian army was prevailing, entire units of the Reds defected to it. The army's failures led to the opposite situation: mass defections from whites to the Reds, and sharp increase in the number of deserters. It can be noted that the white periodicals had difficulty with distribution, which could not but affect the result of campaign. In addition, leaders of the anti-Bolshevik governments recognized the need for outreach and propaganda activities much later than the Bolsheviks, who had created a powerful propaganda machine in late 1917. The verbal images constructed by Svobodная Perm, Современная Perm, and Отечество were repeated from issue to issue, thus becoming stereotypical. The newspapers used a limited range of set phrases, tropes, and cliches to depict them. The most frequently evoked images belonged to the military sphere. The image of the supreme ruler as a military leader was constructed around his personal qualities, a description of the successes of his army, and his stance in opposition to the policies and goals of the Bolsheviks. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really fascinating and important. It's really, yeah, it is very interesting. With some conversation in the chat. This is important research. So let's open this to questions. I can see one from Nadezhda now. Others? Well, maybe you can direct that from your end.
I was trying to clap, actually. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. And I don't know much about this project, and it looks fantastic. And also the area is understudied. So not many research devoted to this sphere, and that's why it sounds so important to pay attention to this army. And the question is regarding the results you obtained during your project. What was the most surprising thing for you?
Maybe some surprising thing was about, can I say it's a bad words in the publications. Really, white forces includes many professors and lecturers, and they are so well educated, but they used
such more bad words when they told about Reds forces.
So you mean that they didn't care about their readers using this low vocabulary?
Yes, but it was the problems. So just because they so well educated, they use difficult words and bad words. Difficult words were too difficult for understanding by ordinary people. But bad words were popular.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Anna Anatolievna Akasheva has some question.
Алина, скажите, пожалуйста, почему ваш выбор упал на ArcGIS? Наверное, это ArcGIS онлайн был, да?
This is my partner, Daniil, chose this program. Why we used ArcGIS in our research? Our specialist in GIS, Daniil Alexeyevich Renev, used this program because of his features, I think, возможностей.
Был онлайн-инструмент?
It's not online. It's not an online resource. It's program. Thank you for your question.
Are there any further questions from the audience or the online participants?
Nothing on our end.
I'd like to thank all of the presenters in this section. It's been really fascinating for me, and I know it has been for you as the audience, and grateful to have the chance to chair this session and to learn about the research that's going on in your part of the world. I think that at this point, we will wrap up this session unless there are further questions or whether the organizer would like to do something different. But I think that this has been a fantastic discussion and debate, and I feel like I've myself learned a lot about all kinds of wonderful research that you're doing in your part of the world, and it's been a pleasure to chair this session.
Thank you very much for your contribution. This is the final point for the first session, but we'll meet soon in a little bit less than half an hour for the next sessions, and I think that we will refer during all the day to your open scholarship issues as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks, everybody.